Hi guys! What's up, what's up? I'm Denalyn R. Ocampo from BEd3A. Good day everyone! Today's video we tackled about conclusions and defense of philosophy. Based on my research, they have different arguments related and philosophical position of Charles Taylor, the contemporary philosopher in 1991, has pointed to increasing dominance of instrumental thinking in the modern world. And one thing we can learn from the philosophical arguments that we have presented in this book is that there is more intellectual life than simple instrumentality. We also argue about things not simply in order to find the most efficient method of doing something, of achieving some practical end. We also argue about values, about what amounts to a good or a desirable way of living. If we take the way of looking at the world that we can find in Adorno or Gadamer or Alasdair MacIntyre and compare it with the stricter version of rational choice theory, it is possible to see what we are talking about. There are particular values carried by the arguments we have explored here. One is respect for the complexity of scientific and philosophical investigation, whether in the natural or the social science. It is too easy to say that the social sciences are in no way like the natural sciences rather than us, that they might have in common and where the differences might be. It is too easy to adopt a conventionalist position on both natural and social sciences and avoiding thinking about backing up our ideas with argument and evidence. It is too easy to adopt an interpretivist or phenomenological position without asking how we interpret, how we understand what people tells us. Do we have to take what they say for granted? Do we have to place their statement in a wider context, etc.? And it is too easy to adopt an interpretivist position without asking difficult ontological questions about the nature of social reality. The message of these arguments tells that there is a value in thinking itself and recognizing the subtleties, depths, and paradoxes of the ideas we use, and the world we study is not avoiding difficult issues because there is no clear answer to them. More important, the social world itself is complex, involving a number of different objects which do not fall easily into the province of any one social science. Economics, history, sociology, social psychology, and psychology all studies interactions between human beings from different perspectives and other different ends in view. Human beings are also object of biology and other natural sciences which produce their own knowledge of the social world. Last time, we talked about the chapter 2 and 3, which is the empiricism and positivism, and in chapter 3, which is some problem of empiricism and positivism. So now, in chapter 2 and 3, we set out the positivist approach to natural science and examine the way in which such an approach has been used by social scientist Durkheim being the classic example. Durkheim said that it would be difficult to rule out of court the practice of this sort of investigation. It is one of the way we find out about what is going on in society, although it does not necessarily explain what is going on. In historically, studies have been important guides to political reform and the amelioration of social problems, and social research organized along positivist lines still has its role to play. The critics of positivism we examine in chapter 3 and 4 do not lead to the conclusion that positivist investigations are pointless or that the knowledge that they produce is somehow wrong. Rather, they mean that we have to be careful about explaining the information that they produce. For example, in the investigation in which the reveals of the British society between the sex and the mental illness. For example, the investigation of British society between sex and mental illness. Sabi nila doon na ang mga babae daw ang inclined sa sakit na depression. At ang mga lalaki naman daw ay mayroong sakit na schizophrenia. Should not be regarded as establishing a biological cause for mental illness, which is different in men and women. The information is starting point. Not all women are depressed, and not all men are schizophrenic. So there might be psychological variables which have to be taken into account. There may be cultural differences in the ways in which men and women deal with unhappiness, and there may be cultural difference in the way that unhappy men and women are perceived by their families. And the medical and other caring professions, in other words, the investigations of what we learn from the positivism-based study leads us to interpretivist theorizing. But without this study, we have nothing to think about. And of course, we can design other studies which can offer us to guide to the adequacy of our interpretive theorizing. In chapter 4, we argue there that there is a clear case that we cannot absorb everything into discourse or culture. Our contemporary culture has its own view of the natural world, but that natural world has an existence that is independent of our view of it. The laws of gravity existed before. In chapter 5, we move on to the interpretive traditions. We presented them as holding in the position that whatever the adequacies or inadequacies of positivism as a philosophy of the natural science, the social sciences were different. This is generally the way they have been presented to students, and it is half true, but it should have become apparent from the sort of criticism that we develop and the logic of their own arguments, that there is more at work than the cultural or discursive dimension of understanding. Those theories we presented as employing an instrumental rationally imply the existence of a reality external world that is independent of our concept and implications, which is there on a common sense of level. In chapter 7, our examination of critical theory and later developments of Habermas' work, the latter identifies a contradiction and a struggle between what we would crudely call the area of culture, of values, and ways of thinking about the world that members of a society share and work with together, with a degree of freedom, and the social system, the social structure, which rests on an instrumental rationally. So guys, lately we have already mentioned the distinction between transitive and intransitive dimension of knowledge. What is the transitive and intransitive dimensions of knowledge? The transitive refers to the dimension of the social and the production of knowledge, such as inherited discourses, scientific training, institutions, and so on. While the intransitive refers to the domain of being what would exist regardless of whether or not humans know of them. The distinction between transitive and intransitive dimension of knowledge, critical realism also talks about there being different types of being in the social world. There is, if you like, a variegated ontology of the social world. It is not made up of one type of thing, and there are a number of different levels. What we see is less than what there is, whereas for most interpretive approaches, what we see is what we get. In chapter 1, we talk about the intimate of link between philosophy and politics. This has emerged at various points in the course of our arguments. Critically theory and critically realism argue that it is possible to provide a basis for moral and political argument, although the basis which each would argue for is different. Critical realism is closer to the radical impetus of the empiricist tradition, arguing that the further our knowledge of the social world, of further the moral and political arguments that we are able to develop. Critical theory uses one form or another of the idea of rationality itself for the basis of moral argument. One might say that the former is more rooted in what is, the latter more in what might be, but they both see the social science is being in some way critical. Another way in which the social science has been argued to be political is on the basis of knowledge, representing the interest of particular social group. Marxist George Lucas argued that because of its social position and the university of its interest, the working class was able to develop a superior knowledge. And also in the first half of 20th century, the sociologist Karl Mannheim, 1936, made the same claim for free-floating intellectuals in this book. In chapter 9, we have discussed a similar claim by some contemporary feminists. It is clear that the concern of some groups, women, ethnic and sexual minorities, and others, can be hidden or ignored by the social sciences, and that it is important that their experience and knowledge of their lives must be taken in account. Such knowledge cannot be treated as better knowledge simply on the grounds that it comes from a particular group, any more than it can be discounted because it comes from the same group experience. The ideas from these groups need to be included in our arguments about what we know and how we know it. So guys, that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something from my video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.